Today we're going to be reviewing the AP World History key concepts for the upcoming exam on Wednesday. This course explores key concepts in modern world history, such as trade networks, state formation, the Colombian exchange, transoceanic voyages, and social impacts of worldwide interconnection. You also need to know your 3 historical thinking skills: comparison, continuity or change over time, and causation for the essays. So, trade networks and state formation. Trade networks played a crucial role in cementing economic growth and fostering cultural diffusion. The expansion of these networks was instrumental in interconnecting cultures and regions. State formation, on the other hand, depicted a sense of stability through continuity, innovation, and diversity across various regions. State formation and trade networks were deeply intertwined, each influencing the other. The changes and developments in these aspects over time had a profound impact on the course of world history and on society's evolution. So there's multiple things you could find just in there, as long as you can find evidence for something like an LEQ, or you could use to add complexity to your DBQ. Next, let's take a look at the Colombian exchange and transoceanic voyaging. So the Colombian exchange initiation was obviously after Christopher Columbus's voyages, establishing trade connections between the eastern and western hemispheres. So it marked the exchange of distinct plants, animals, and diseases across hemispheres, significantly impacting societies globally. Transoceanic voyages with advanced maritime technology such as the Sextant navigational device increased contact between previously isolated regions and cultures. These voyages transformed trade, influencing economic structures throughout the world, and transoceanic voyaging led to distinct social structures and paved the way for cultural diffusion. With closer connections, the spread of disease like smallpox and measles rapidly escalated, posing significant human challenges. The exchange of crops like corn and potatoes led to the evolution of global cuisines. And the Colombian exchange and transoceanic voyaging had a long-lasting impact on globalization, marking the onset of interconnected global networks. That right there is a perfect sentence that you could use in your contextualization paragraph for one of the essays if necessary. Once again, this presentation will be linked in the description along with a quiz at the end. So, interactions and religious developments here. Interactions between regions. The varied interactions between different regions and cultures had a profound influence on religious developments, often causing conflicts due to diverse religious perspectives and practices. Once again, the College Board does not care so much that you know the facts as much as that you can relate them using the 3 historical thinking skills. Causation is one of them. Influence on state development here. Religious ideas were utilized by expanding empires as strategies for maintaining power. They helped in centralizing control and expanding influence regionally and globally. Once again, a continuity throughout history. So the rise of political and economic elites here. In many instances, religious institutions played a vital role in the rise of new political and economic elites during periods of imperial conquest, which is a big focus of world history. So the influence on revolutions here. Religious ideas and Enlightenment thought led to revolutions against governments and existing structures. You see that in both Great Awakenings and the Enlightenment. And they were inspired by concepts of reason, natural rights, and democracy. That's something that's touched on a little bit more in AP US history, but you should also know this for world history. So post-industrial revolution changes as well. Religious interactions was one among many factors that led to increased standards of living, improved manufacturing techniques, and more expansive trade networks. There's more causation there. And finally, its part in nationalist movements. Religious sentiments were often intertwined with nationalist movements in the 18th century, especially around revolutions and rebellions against existing governments. All right, so now let's go through our first checklist here: changes in labor systems and emergence of elites. It increased global demand for goods, leading to the expansion of labor systems. Intensification of traditional forms of enslavement due to increased labor demand also came from this. There was the emergence of political and economic elites due to imperial conquests. There was access to global economic opportunities leading to the rise of these new elites. There were changes in societal structures through the rise of these elites as well, and implementation of power maintenance strategies by empires such as religious ideas and centralized control. There was economic imperialism, which promoted primarily by states expanding overseas. Things such as mercantilism came from this. And the role of industrial capitalism in enhancing living standards, improving manufacturing, and globalizing trade networks. All right, next up, strategies for maintaining power and industrial capitalism. In the eventful progression of history, empires adopted numerous strategies to maintain power and control over their territories. These strategies often entailed promoting certain religious ideas and establishing centralized control. Imperial conquests and economic opportunities led to the rise of new political and economic elites who, in turn, influenced the direction of the state's policies. Concurrently, the concept of industrial capitalism emerged, heralding a transformative phase in the world. The advent of industrial capitalism meant increased living standards for many, bolstered manufacturing practices, and led to the globalization of trade networks, thereby impacting societies across the globe. Once again, all of this information is from the 16-page AP College Board Key Concepts Overview. So this is how you know that everything here you need to know. So let's take a look at some flashcards here, which once again you can see through the link in the description. You can go through these on your own. The expansion of overseas empires here. How did states expand their overseas empires? States expanded their overseas empires through the means of warfare and diplomacy. This expansion was particularly prominent in Asia and Latin America. So who prompted economic imperialism? Some states, particularly those with expanded overseas empires, were the primary promoters of economic imperialism, like the British and the French, who dominated in Africa, and the Dutch, who dominated in Indochina. All of those places and empires. So how did economic imperialism impact global trade? Economic imperialism altered global trade by creating extensive trade networks, allowing these overseas empires to control and dominate resources. And what was the role of industrial capitalism in empire expansion? Industrial capitalism underpinned these empires by leading to increased living standards, improved manufacturing, and expanded global trade networks. So which regions were primarily influenced by overseas empire expansion? Asia and Latin America were the primary regions influenced by the expansion of overseas empires. And how did the expansion of empires impact society? Empire expansion usually led to significant social, economic, and political changes within the dominated regions. And what strategies did empires use to maintain power? Empires used numerous strategies, including promoting religious ideas and enforcing centralized control to maintain power. How did the overseas expansion of empires lead to the emergence of elites? The opportunities presented by imperial conquest and economic expansion allowed new political and economic elites to emerge once again through many empires. All right, now let's explore revolutions, rebellions, and the Enlightenment thought. So the rise of Enlightenment thought. Enlightenment thought began to rise in the 18th century with philosophers emphasizing reason, natural rights, and democracy. Once again, a lot of this is touched upon in AP US history too, so try to retain specifically these ideas in your head for next year, and challenge traditional ideas and government structures. So to start revolutions, Enlightenment ideas led to a series of revolutions against existing governments around the globe. The 18th century marked several rebellions against prevailing governments, leading to the establishment of new nation states. And Enlightenment thought influenced the recognition of natural rights, the push for democracy, and it initiated reform movements specifically in Europe. Whoops. So, colonial subjects revolt. Inspired by ideas of Enlightenment and nationalist sentiment, colonial subjects initiated rebellions seeking independence from imperial rule, once again rooting from Europe and spreading out into the colonies. Revolutionary upheavals and dynamic changes in the political landscape drastically changed global migration patterns as well. And the ideas emerging during the Enlightenment fed into the advancements in science and technology, further altering societies and pushing Europe towards their industrial revolution, which the US would follow shortly behind in. And the effect on social order. These revolutions rooted in Enlightenment thought challenged and often drastically altered the existing social hierarchies and orders. We see these through things like the French Rebellion. All right, worldwide conflicts and emergence of new states. So the rise of worldwide conflicts here. They began to emerge in response to socio-economic changes, the dissolution of empires, and challenges to existing orders, often leading to dramatic shifts in power dynamics. What about the creation of new states? The dismantling of empires and colonial rule led to the formation of new nation-states around the world. This process was often tumultuous and steeped in conflict. You can see it's very late on in the course through the breakup of the USSR, but also just in general, decolonization brought many instances of this. So then World Wars I and II here. World Wars I and II were massive global conflicts that fueled intense nationalism and militarism, redrawing geopolitical borders and leading to the emergence of new states once again. And atrocities and genocide. These conflicts often saw extremist groups like the Nazis commit horrifying atrocities and genocide, leaving a lasting wound in human history, so you definitely need to know those. Then intensified nationalism and militarism. We already kind of touched on this a little in the World Wars I and II subject, but world conflicts and wars further escalated nationalist sentiment and militarization in places like the US and Europe, leading to shifts in socio-political landscapes. And finally, the emergence of superpowers. World conflicts also led to the emergence of new world powers or superpowers, driving the dynamics of global politics in the later 20th century. After World War II, the U.S. emerged as a superpower. The USSR was still present. They were kind of the two big ones there. China would begin its rise along with India after the British decolonization. So now let's look at the impact of the Cold War, which I believe is our final topic today. What was the main conflict during the Cold War? The main conflict during the Cold War was between the US and Soviet Union. It was based on ideological differences, specifically capitalism versus communism. So what were the results of the Cold War? The Cold War resulted in military alliances, nuclear proliferation, and proxy wars that significantly influenced global events. You see in things like the Bay of Pigs, but then also in the SALT I and SALT II to decrease nuclear weapons after they were built up so much, which will be touched on in AP US history as well. So which factors influenced the end of the Cold War? The end of the Cold War was influenced by several factors, including technological advancements and economic weaknesses of the Soviet Union. The main thing there is that the US pretty much was spending so much on their military that the Soviet Union couldn't keep up, and Mikhail Gorbachev ultimately led to the demise of this after Reagan pushed a lot of spending on them. What movements emerged in response to conflicts during the Cold War? Movements advocating nonviolence and challenging the existing orders emerged in response to conflicts during the Cold War era. And how did the Cold War affect government's roles in the economy? So government roles in the economy varied throughout the Cold War, with a trend towards free market policies emerging in the late 20th century after this war on communism. So how did the Cold War affect global events? The Cold War caused significant economic and political shifts, which profoundly shaped global events, relationships, and policies. And finally, how did the Cold War influence proxy wars? Oh, not finally, there's one more. During the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union often engaged in proxy wars, supporting different sides in conflicts all around the world. So this was bigger than just the US and the USSR, and they would try their best to get involved. The US had the policy of containment past things like the Eisenhower Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine, which were all to stop the spread of communism. This is evidenced in the Korean War and Vietnam War, where both sides, the US and the Soviet Union, took a part in that. And what led to the proliferation of nuclear weapons during the Cold War? Competition between the US and Soviet Union during the Cold War led to the rapid proliferation of nuclear weapons. However, this did begin to decrease through multiple foreign policies that were passed by both nations. All right, so, this is our wrap up here. The modern advances and shifts. The late 20th century marked significant advances in information and communication technology, transforming and globalizing economies. International organizations like the United Nations emerged, focusing on promoting peace and cooperation on a global scale. Movements began to challenge the uneven consequences of global integration and traditional beliefs, and access to education and inclusion in new roles saw marked improvements, reflecting a shift towards a more inclusive society. These shifts accompanied cultural changes as a consumer culture transcending borders began to develop, mirroring the continually globalizing society. So that was our wrap up there. And then at the end here, there's a short quiz that you guys can view. In the description, there's this whole course posted from start to end. So hopefully you guys will check that out and let me know what other topics you want me to cover. I can create any of these that you guys want.